have you kind of noticed that maybe in your neighborhood, your county, your state, whatever, that it may have gone through a few changes over the last few years? I mean, does everybody still go to the high school football game on Friday night in the First Baptist Church on Sunday? Maybe sometime along the line, somebody with a different accent and a different philosophy on what's important in wildlife conservation or use of wildlife. Maybe they don't share exactly what you have shared, or maybe it's changing. Maybe you're just looking at exactly what that is. Well, I'm betting that some of that's happening no matter where you are. And that's why we've asked Dr. Cecil Stewart to speak to us today regarding the demographic changes and the sustainability challenges in the Southeast and using a tool for your use. It's important for us to recognize these things that are changing and what impact it has on us. And Dr. Stewart is professor and the Dean Emeritus of the College of Architecture at the University of Nebraska, where he served as Dean for 27 years. In 1996, he founded the Jocelyn Castle Institute for Sustainable Communities, and he serves as the president and CEO. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, a former national president of the American Institute of Architects, and is co-author with Dr. Sharon Kuska of the recent book, Sustainometrics. Dr. Stewart.
Well, good morning, folks. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. This is a different venue for me, as you might imagine from the indication of my background. I'm normally talking with urban planners and community development folks. I have to give you a couple of quick personal references. I grew up in Texas, and hunting and fishing was a real part of my life. And I guess, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. I have a son who is an advocate and a real dedicated bow hunter. And he comes down in this territory to Arkansas frequently as he can. And he's very successful. He's very passionate. I knew from the beginning of some dove hunting with him when he was 6 years old, and he noticed that I hadn't done my job quite well enough, and there was a bird fluttering on the ground, and he took a couple of steps, backed up, and then pounced on it. And I said, this guy is going to be a hunter. And it's true, he's turned out that way. The other, in preparation for this, that I want to mention to you, as you noticed, I climbed these 2 steps a little slowly, that maybe at my age and stage, I could be a metaphor for what you folks are facing. I'm challenged by age, and I'm challenged by gravity. 2 things I can't do a thing about. But I can try to practice resiliency, and I can do some things that try to mitigate and make my life comfortable as much as possible. Seems to me that in looking at the demographics of this region, that's very much where you are in general, is how can you adjust, mitigate, plan for resiliency, and do it cooperatively. Whoever came up with your title for this series and this conference, the 2 key words, cooperative and disruptive change, are the words that we should pay most attention to. And I also commend those who planned the conference, because the previous speakers have talked about partnerships, we've talked about personal commitment, they've talked about getting everyone at the table. They've talked about using data. And I guess one question I'd like to ask for a little audience participation here, how many of you have access to a really workable GIS system? Okay, and out of those of you who've raised your hands, how many of you use it on a weekly basis? Uh-huh. Well, as a planner, I think we have more to do with the technology and the information that's available to us. Just a quick 10-second commercial. The nonprofit that I founded was out of frustration that we were not moving far enough, quickly enough on discussions with the public and with our colleagues about sustainability. So this is what the Joslin Institute tries to do. We've been doing this now for 15 years. And the partnership, the collaboration, and disruptive change is the reason that we organized this program. I want to visit with you about 4 key topics. That we're in new environmental imperatives, and demographics, climate change, and non-renewable resources are all connected together in those imperatives. We're facing sustainable development, which is a new way of thinking, and life, habitat, business, and commerce, whether it's natural systems or human systems, will change. Sustainability planning, design, construction, and manufacturing, anything that we cherish and value for sustaining will require a system of metrics. We need to know where we're headed, how we're doing, and what we need to change. Now, this map you will recognize is not your particular region. I don't know what happened to the rest of my state, Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri, but in any event, this is some of our federal government's designation of the Southeast region. In preparation for this visit, I visited with the director of the Nebraska Federation for Wildlife. And he tells me within his experience, at least, there's a couple of divisions. He says he deals with what he calls the hook and bullet crowd and the bird and bunny crowd. Well, I guess every organization has different people with different attitudes. But I'm here to suggest to you that there should be and could be a coalescing of those divisions as town and country, flora and fauna. How do we seek the collaboration of the planners and the citizens and the landowners, as our previous speaker has so eloquently alluded to as the key to success? Town and country. Do we just define fish and wildlife activities at the city limits, at the borders, and let it go at that? But the borders, as you well know, are increasing. They're growing. And perhaps your territory is diminishing in the process. The critical sustainability imperatives, human population, climate change, consumption of the Earth's natural resources, that being land, water, energy, materials, and then the 4th one, food. The demands in production for food is going to further diminish the natural habitat because it will be seen to be a higher priority in some locations, in some places. We're all living in an urbanizing world. For the first time this year, on a global basis, more of us live in cities than live elsewhere. And it is only projected to continue. This is a National Geographic graphic depiction since 1950, year 2000 in the middle, and projected for 2015 of the number of cities that will be more than 5 million people by 2015. There are 30 of these, and at least one of them is approaching 20 million. that being Shanghai in China. Well, that's globally. Does that have anything to do with us locally? It does, and it does in very dramatic ways. First of all, we're experiencing similar agglomerations of people moving to urban areas. This is a fairly recent nighttime photo, 2010, of the population distribution in the United States. And you know your territory, but if you just kind of draw a circle around the southeast U.S., you live in the midst of about 1/3 of the population of the United States, a little more than 1/3. You live in an area that has at least 30% of the forest canopy cover in the U.S. You live in a region that has more than 50% of the coastline of the United States. Every one of these conditions is a vulnerability and an opportunity. Just for a little more definition of the demographics, 113.2 million in the Southeast region, 308.7 in the entire United States. That's a 10.7% growth rate. It's higher growth rate than the United States. More disturbing, I think, is the density. Southeast region has more than 130 people per square mile, whereas the US has about 87. Another disturbing statistic is the median household income. Out of the 15 states in this region, only Virginia has a higher median income than the US average. Female population, okay guys, here's your chance. Average 50.7 in the US, it's about 52% in this region. Under 18 population, the opportunity. Previous speakers have mentioned the importance of education. Almost 25% of the population of the US is under 18 years of age. It's higher in this region by a point or two. 1/4 of the population of this region is your opportunity. There are 7 sort of bellwether states within the region, and I won't go into detail with these. You can pull this information up off the U.S. Census report, excuse me, for every state in the Union. But Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida, and Texas are the highest population and the highest rate of density in the region. I want to do just a quick little thing. Let me back up to these maps. This bar diagram off to the right of the image, watch how that varies and changes across these 7 states as I flip through it. Back up. As you can see, there are different profiles of different percentages of people in different states by age group categories. It's important that this kind of information, I think, be consciously studied, as well as all of the data that you would collect normally on habitat, populations of natural wildlife and fish species. Never thought I'd see so many people in Texas at such a high rate of density over such a large territory. Climate change. We can argue until the sun sets and comes up and sets about who's responsible for climate change. The fact is, we probably are not the cause. Most likely, according to this, every 100,000 years, the rotation of the Earth wobbles around the sun. And we get cooling and heating. As this diagram indicates to you, we are at the peak, just at the beginning of the peak of another one of these cycles. The difference in any other time in history is that the rate of CO2 emissions has dramatically increased, and it's known to increase the temperature. So we have a convergence here, and how much of it should we be trying to control? And what's the impact? This map was put together in 2003 by some agronomists at the University of Illinois, indicating that the climate zones are migrating. Projection here indicated is that by 2030, the summer climate for Illinois will be similar to the existing climate of Missouri, Arkansas. By 2095, projected to be similar to the current climate in Oklahoma and East Texas. Having grown up in Texas, I can tell you that they don't raise much corn in Texas. The corn food base for Illinois, Nebraska, Kansas, and the Midwestern states is corn, and it's going to take a major transformation in genetics if corn farmers will still be able, under these circumstances, to farm corn. And how about this particular region? Projections of 90-degree days from 1961 to 79 and projected 2080 to 2099, where more than half the year in this region is projected to be above 90 degrees. What's that likely to do to the natural habitat? What's it likely to do to the flora and fauna? What's it likely to do to the micro weather patterns of this particular region? How can we mitigate and prepare for resilience? Forest canopy cover. Again, draw a circle around this region and you can see that it encompasses about a third of all the forest cover in this country. Coastline. Stretch this out from Virginia down to the tip of Texas in a straight line, and it's more than 50% vulnerability to sea rise of the melting south and north polar ice caps. Impact. Projection for Miami Beach for 1.5 meter rise in the sea. And 1.5 is not the end of it in terms of our potential. Jacksonville Beach, Wilmington Island, Georgia. Consumption is the biggest barrier, the greatest challenge. And it's not so much consumption of the fact that we are consuming at such a rate, it's what we are consuming. It's our non-renewable natural resources. A mitigation strategy that we project is that if we were designing things from a different point of view, if we were using different materials, we still would be able to support a viable international global economy and still be able to have a consumption-based economy in this country. But we have to challenge and ask ourselves, what is it that we're making these things from? And are there alternatives? Is this a part of our future? It's a part of my daughter's present. She lives in Santa Monica, California. And this, in some version, happens every day in that situation. Land speculation, sprawl, the importance of engaging the landowners, developers, planners, community leaders, civic leadership. These are the partners. You have good partnership, I suggest, with everybody who cares about what you already care about. All of the nonprofit and enterprise associations connected with natural habitat and natural systems. These are your unnatural partners. How do we accomplish that? And in the midst of all that, the peak oil and the energy consumption and the fact that we cannot continue to count on life as usual in a carbon society as we have known it. Then one of perhaps the common denominators is food. And food systems, if you look quickly down this list, quantity, quality, safety, production, economics, you could take food off of the top of that list and you could substitute community. You could substitute wildlife habitat, I would suggest to you, because every one of these indicators is also an indicator of your life and your work. We have determined that the old original concept of sustainable development, which was environment, economics, and social, and that we need to try to balance these three, comes short of our target and our opportunity. There should be 2 additional domains added to these 3. One is public policy, and the other is technologies. You could accomplish economic, social, and environmental conditions in a very nice package and say, we've got the problem solved. And suddenly find out that through political action, through unenlightened leadership, a new public policy is put up as a barrier, let's say, against land conservation easements. Some people think that's, it's a negative. And you would have a new barrier simply because of a public policy. And the same is true with technologies. If we can't afford it, if it's not available, and if we aren't using it, then technology becomes a barrier. We have developed, and I guess this is the reason that I'm here in terms of, how did a guy from Nebraska get to the Southeast? We've developed a study of sustainometrics, and it is a system that we've tested on a variety of scales, whether it be a building, a land use, a neighborhood, a community, an entire region. We believe that if you use these 5 domains, and if you define indicators in each of the 5 domains, according to a complete understanding and association of all 5 of the domains, you can measure indicators. This is where the data system, the GIS, the information, the inventory, the baseline comes to bear. And you can determine whether you're moving toward a sustainable condition in each of these 5 domains or whether you're moving away from it. You can do predictive studies, and you can do post-planning analysis to determine what your next step might be. You can use it as a communication vehicle, establishing priorities, and establishing the economic support that it will require. You can figure out whether the economic indicator is influencing the environmental indicator or vice versa, and what the trade-offs are in the process. What we've come to a conclusion about, partly at the lack of national leadership, but mostly because it's on the ground in the community. It's at that active spot where action matters most. So having everyone at the table, having the conversation first, as the previous speaker suggested, before we have conservation is essential and critical. Finally, if any of you are familiar with Richard Lou's work, The Last Child in the Woods, he has written a new book called The Nature Principle. The future, he says, will belong to the nature smart, those individuals, families, businesses, and political leaders who develop a deeper understanding of the transformative power of the natural world and who balance the virtual with the real. This, I think, should perhaps be a textbook for all of us. Recommend it to you if you've not already read it. It is the way that we will be the leaders and not the victims. Thank you.